And as Catherine Maria Sedgwick could write in her novel, The Power of Her Sympathy, I believe it was that, Hannah's eyes were flashing like a cat's when she saw this child. And she screamed at her, telling her to get out, telling her she had to get out. She wasn't going to let this slattern in the house. And Bet said to her, "Madam, she needs to see the judge." The judge was not there. Colonel Ashley was not there. And Hannah said, screaming, "Get her out, get her out." And Bet said, "Madam, it's lawful. She needs to see the judge. And Madam knows that when I put my foot down, I keep it down." And she stood towering over Hannah, over her mistress, and Hannah acquiesced and went away, fuming. And the girl was taken later to see Colonel Ashley, who asked Bet to stay in the room as the girl told this story of being abused by her father. And it was just a terrible story. Unfortunately, the father was put in jail. The girl was then killed, and by the relatives. But Colonel Ashley said to Bet, "What you did was right. Thank you so much." And at that point, she sort of became a bit of a helper to Colonel Ashley, and she started to serve the gentleman in the study. So she became, and in the meantime, she was becoming an accomplished cook, an herbalist, a healer, and a midwife. She was delivering babies, the Ashley's neighbors, and it's disputed. We're not sure whether she was allowed to take the money offered, and if she did take it, it was likely that Hannah took 90% of it, if not all of it. But she delivered babies in town, both black and white babies, and including those of Theodore and Pamela Sedgwick. And we're going to talk about him in a minute. And she knew the Sedgwicks well. So in 1773 now, prior to the start of the Revolution, the colonies had become a place of rebellion. And Colonel Ashley and many others, we'll go back to that. Skip over that one for a minute. You can actually skip over that. We'll go back to that one. Yeah, skip over. We'll go back. Go back to the first one before. I'm not ready yet. Yeah. Let's see. Colonel Ashley and others were gathering at the Red Lion Inn in Stockbridge and in homes, discussing about being angry at the high taxes imposed upon them, discussing ideas of freedom and liberty, reading from John Locke. And many of the events led up to the Revolutionary War, including the Stamp Act, imposing taxes on legal documents, and then the British occupying Boston to enforce these taxes and to clamp down on local radicals. So Ashley's study became a hotbed, a gathering place for a committee of men who were writing letters of grievance to King George, demanding freedom from the strong arm of the British. Now, Colonel Ashley then, after this incident with Tamara Graham, he realized that he wanted Bet, to work, to be kind of with him in the study, serving the gentleman, which sort of enraged his wife. She said, "She's mine. She works for me." And her husband said, I want her to serve the gentleman in the study. You will allow this. And she had to. So they were writing these letters. 11 men gathered, including Ethan Allen, Samuel Adams. But for Bet, most importantly, was Theodore Sedgwick, who was a young lawyer and was the scribe during these heated discussions and meetings. And Bet served these men, all listening all the while to these discussions. The fact, as I said, the fact that Bet was privy to these meetings likely enraged Hannah. And as she served the men, she hears the first line in a document known as the Sheffield Declaration. And it says, "Resolved that mankind in a state of nature are created equal and free and independent of each other, and have a right to the undisturbed enjoyment of their lives, liberty, and property." So you can imagine how she felt standing there enslaved while listening to these words. What a double standard. And she may have said, we know she said this eventually to Catherine Maria, who you'll meet a little bit later. When she thought about this, she said, "Why is it that I, who am not a beast, but of mankind, why is it that I cannot be free?" Well, the Revolutionary War begins in 1775 after the first shots were fired. And around this time, or a little before, we believe that Bet meets an enslaved man and falls in love. And they marry. But because slave marriages were not legal at the time, there is no document to prove this. And in the documentation, she's considered a spinster, but we don't believe that is true. The two had a child called Elizabeth, or which they called Little Bet, sometimes Betsy. And Bet and her husband were likely unable to live together, but saw each other frequently. And as the war raged on, there was a call for more fighting. Men and enslaved men were offered the opportunity to fight. Upon the end of the war, they would be granted their freedom. And Bet's husband, we believe, joined up, hoping to earn his freedom and then buy Bet's and Little Bet's freedom. Tragically, he was killed at the Battle of Saratoga. And this was a devastating blow to Bet for many reasons. She listened to all those words of freedom, and yet she didn't want to run away. She knew that if she ran away, she would never stop running. She wanted to be free in a legal, lawful way. And she was also terrified that if she did anything like that and got caught, Hannah would sell her daughter away. The Albany slave market was close enough by, and it was just an absolutely horrific thought. The war dragged on. She was probably very depressed, moping. And what happened next is sort of the impetus of what made things change for her. So her little girl was a tiny little girl, and she was in the kitchen, and there were some scraps of cornmeal in the pan, and she was putting together a little corn cake, and because she was hungry. And at that point, Hannah Ashley saw her. Now you may change the slide. Hannah Ashley saw the little girl putting together a little corn cake, and she was enraged. And she called the girl a thief. How dare you steal from my larder? And she took a hot poker out of the fire, a hot shovel. It was red hot. And she was aiming it for the child. She would have killed the child. There's no question about it, because Bet ran in from where she was maybe hanging laundry, ran in and put her arm up to block the blow. And it burned to the bone. I mean, it would have killed the child. It burned to her bone. She collapsed. She almost died. The fellow enslaved people grabbed her. Hannah Ashley ran out. John Ashley was not there at the time. They took her to the shed where she slept, and they probably abreeded the wound. They did what, she was maybe unconscious in delirium for a long time. And finally, the healing began. John Ashley came home and apologized to her, blaming Hannah. I don't know that she accepted his apology, but he was absolutely livid with Hannah, because another enslaved man, Zach, she had also locked in a shed for days, and he was trying to sue her. She was really a terrible person. Anyway, her arm was burned. Eventually it began to heal, and she would roll up her sleeve to show that wound. She never covered it. And Hannah would tell her, cover that disgusting thing, and she would just not do it. She just kept her sleeves rolled up. She wanted everyone to see the damage that she had endured, that Hannah inflicted upon her, would have killed her child. And there was one dinner party where the Sedgwicks were there, Pamela and Theodore Sedgwick, and it's reported that Pamela sees this scar and says, "Why, Betty, what ails your arm?" And she just says, "Ask the missus." And anyway, so she's trying to think about how she can get out of this abominable situation and become free. In 1780, the Massachusetts Constitution was ratified, and writers from Boston came to every town in Massachusetts to give the news expressing the rights and responsibilities of the citizens of Massachusetts. And in that document were the words she had heard in the study: all men are created free and equal. She understood now that this was not just a letter to the king, this was a law. So when her arm was healed and spring came, she took her daughter on a market day so as not to cause suspicion. Now you can fix this, you can move the slide. And she went to the home of Theodore Sedgwick. And there it is. Theodore Sedgwick lived 4 miles away. in right across from the Sheffield Green. And his house still stands. That's his house, still kept like that. And she knocked at the door. She was shown in, and basically they asked her, "What are you doing here?" And she said, "I've come to see Mr. Sedgwick, Squire Sedgwick." And she went in to speak to speak to him. And he said, and he was taken aback by, why she would come. And she said, "I want you to help me sue for my freedom." And he says, "How did you come to know of this?" Now, she probably looked at him like, "Are you kidding me? I was listening to you." And she said, "By keeping still and minding things." She was very bright. She couldn't read or write, but she understood, and she understood that this was now a law. Well, Theodore had to think long and hard about this suing for freedom, because Colonel Ashley was a very good friend of his, a mentor, had loaned him money. He was rather like a father figure to the young lawyer. But whether it was altruism, a sense of justice, or just ambition, we're not really sure. But he decided to take on the case. But as a woman, Bette had no rights in court. She needed a man to sue along with her. So the next slide, I believe. This is Brom. Now, Brom was owned by Colonel Ashley's son, who was a General Ashley Jr., John Ashley Jr. And he was reportedly more like his mother than his father. He was a cruel master. But Brom said, "Where am I going to go? I mean, where will I go? I have a place to lay my head after working." And Bette really didn't beg for much of anything, but she sort of begged for this. She said, "Please help me win my freedom. You can go back and then you'll be free and he'll have to pay you." And after much coaxing, he agreed. And so 2 days later, a writ of replevin was issued to Colonel Ashley. Now, if you can go to the next slide. This is General Ashley's house, a beautiful big house. It's now privately owned, but it's preserved in the same manner as it was in 1775. It's right down the street from the Ashley house, and that's where the general lived and where Brom was enslaved. 2 days later, a writ of replevin was issued to Colonel and General Ashley, and this was an order to take back stolen goods and property. The property in question were two people. The Ashleys refused this. They wouldn't allow this to happen, and they demand a bond, some sort of security that if Bette and Brom lose in court, they must return to their enslavement. So the bond was paid. Theodore Sedgwick pays the bond, and a few days later, on June 5th, 1781, Theodore Sedgwick issues a new writ. The sheriffs deliver this, and they have to let them go. And with little Bette in tow, the two leave the house, possibly forever. I don't know what the next slide is, but you can go to the next slide. Let's see. Oh, that's just a document. Maybe that is the writ of replevin. Go to the next slide, I think. Yeah, you can stay there. Theodore calls upon his old friend Tapping Reeve, a lawyer who actually opened the very first law school in America, right in your state of Litchfield, Connecticut. And he's a brilliant lawyer, and they discuss this case. And at that point, Bette stays with the Sedgwicks during this time, and she cares for the children, and there were many children. The Sedgwicks had 10 children, 3 of whom didn't live very long, but there were 7. And at this point, we believe, is when she takes on the name Mumbet. It was maybe a derivation of Mambet or Mammy Bet, which the Sedgwick children likely called her. And there have been many heated discussions about this name, whether it was a slave name or whether it was a name, a sweet name, nickname. But she was called Mumbet for the rest of her life. On August 19th, 1781, Sedgwick, Reeve, Bette, and Brom arrive in Great Barrington Courthouse, and the case Brom and Bette versus Ashley begins. Colonel Ashley hires the best legal team he can, Jonathan Canfield from Connecticut and David Noble from Williamstown, Massachusetts. Their argument is Brom and Bette are and were, at the time of the original writ, the legal Negro servants of the said John Ashley during their lives. Sedgwick argues that they were not the legal servants during their lives, as no law in Massachusetts clearly established slavery in the first place. They stated that even if there were laws allowing slavery, the new Massachusetts Constitution would revoke those laws, as all men were free and equal in Massachusetts. The trial lasted 2 days. The jury heard the case, and on August 21st, 1781, jury and judge unanimously declared that Brom and Bet are not and were not, at the time of the original writ, the legal servants of the said John Ashley during life. They were free, and Ashley was ordered to pay 30 shillings in damages and all court costs, which were £5, 14 shillings, and 4 pence legal money. It was at this time that she took the name Freeman and became Elizabeth Freeman, though she was still affectionately called Mumbet. Brom returned to the Ashley house, to General Ashley's home, where he worked as a paid servant at this time. And though Colonel Ashley offered her a job back at his house, she refused. And she began to work as a nanny and housekeeper for the Sedgwicks, all the while working as a healer and midwife, delivering babies, both black and white, and, quote, never losing a baby in the birthing. And she was able to keep all of her money. She was paid and kept all the money from her midwifery. And she lived with the Sedgwicks for many years. But I want to just make it clear that in 1783, so 1781 was when she was declared free. And because of her case and one other, the Quock Walker case, in 1783, Massachusetts abolishes slavery. And by the 1790s, there are no enslaved people on the census. So she changed the course of history. And this story, to preserve her legacy, is so important to me. She lived with the Sedgwicks for many years. In 1783, when the war was finally over, they moved to Stockbridge, and this is the mansion. And her Theodore Sedgwick bought the last remaining Mohican-owned land, and he built this mansion overlooking the Hudson River. Agrippa Hull, a free black man and the son of an African prince, worked there as well, and he was an aide to the Polish general, the famous general Thaddeus Kosciuszko. And Theodore, as the years go by, he becomes more and more ambitious. So if you could change the slide, I believe we see a picture of Theodore. That's Theodore Sedgwick. Go to the next slide. That is his wife, Pamela Dwight Sedgwick. And the next slide is their daughter, Catherine Mariah Sedgwick, who becomes the very first female novelist in the United States. And I'm going to talk about her in a little bit. The next slide is a very, that's the famous portrait of Theodore Sedgwick. He becomes more and more ambitious. And I'm just going to take a little drink. In 1789, he becomes an elected representative to Congress, and then he becomes a senator, and he's spending a lot of time in Boston, leaving Pamela alone with the children and Mumbet. And Pamela is getting more and more depressed. Pamela is not a well woman. Several of her children have died. She's depressed. Her husband is off in Boston most of the time. Then in August of 1786, the Shays Rebellion takes place. Now, when the farmers in Western Massachusetts came back from the war, and their farms were pretty desolate, their wives had tried to run the places, had run the farms, but there was really it was really difficult. And before that, they were able to barter to pay their bills, to pay their taxes. But now they were required to pay real money, which they did not have. So the rebels claimed that the tax collection practices by the government unfairly targeted the poor and were short-sighted in seizing land and assets to collect debts. And rebels came, and they came to many houses, Daniel Shays and a lot of his neighbors. Now, whether this was justified or not is up to you to decide. But these rebels, so Theodore knew that the rebels wanted him, and he knew it. And so what he did was he sent his family to stay with neighbors, and he sent Little Bet there and his family and children, and he went to Boston. He left Mumbet and a few other servants to watch the house. She's quite famous for what she did. So Mumbet first of all, she went out to the barn. He had a beautiful horse, Jenny, and she smacked that horse and sent that horse running so they wouldn't find that horse and steal it. Then she went down to the cellar where the wine and beer was stored, and she pushed the big kegs of the old beer in the front. She went up, she grabbed all of the silver, anything of value she could find, and she brought it to her attic room where she slept. And she had a big trunk that contained her belongings, and she put all the silver and jewels, whatever she could find of value, in that trunk. Then she slept by the hearth that night with a shovel as her only weapon. And that night, Shay's people came to the house, banging on the door. Let us in. We need to find Squire Sedgwick. And, she knew several of these men who came to the door demanding Theodore. And she had her shovel, and they pushed by her, probably calling her all kinds of names, and trudging through her house, her clean house, with their filthy boots. They went down to the cellar and tried to take some of the beer, which she had put the old beer, and they spat it out and said, what is this? And she said, this is the beer the gentlemen drink. You're probably not gentlemen. And then they went upstairs and they rummaged through. They took their bayonets and they put them under the beds and tried to find Theodore Sedgwick, thinking he was hiding there. And eventually they went up to her attic bedroom. She sat on that chest and they told her to move. And she said, how dare you? You're going to actually rummage through my chest? How dare you? You men, get out of here. And they actually turned and left. And she said, praise be to God, because she saved the day. They left. And then Pamela came back. Theodore was still, back and forth to Boston. Pamela became very, very depressed. We're not sure whether we believe that she had some mental issues. She was very, very depressed. She may have taken her own life. She dies in Mumbet's arms, leaving her many children to be raised by Mumbet. 7 of the children survived after her death in 1807, and Mumbet raised them all and loved them as her own. And they called her mother. They loved her. Catherine Maria was just a baby, or just a very small child, and she absolutely loved Mumbet, loved her so much. And she, as I said, she became the first woman novelist, the first female novelist in the United States. She was contemporaries of Washington Irving. She was a famous novelist. And and this is where we found the information. She wrote about Mumbet in many, many books. And when Catherine was grown, Theodore remarried, and Bet realized it was time to move on. She had bought herself a little house. Her daughter, little Bet, married Jonah Humphreys, and they moved to this area called Cherry Hill, where many free Blacks lived. Bet knew it was time to move, and she bought this little house in Stockbridge, right near the Sedgwicks, on Cherry Hill, a little teeny cottage overlooking Agawam Pond. She owned 12 acres, and she lived there until she died on December 28th, 1829. And and you can move the slide now. So let's see where we are now. Yeah, what's in a name? We'll talk about that. And one of the reasons that we named the book with a quote, "A Free Woman on God's Earth," is because, and I have the book here, I'm going to just read to you the quote that she told Catherine. Catherine said to her, tell me what it was like to be enslaved. She said, anytime when I was a slave, if I had been offered 1 minute's freedom and told that at the end of that minute, I would have taken it, and told at the end of that minute I would have to die, I would have taken it just to stand 1 minute a free woman on God's earth. I would. And so we believe that the children had asked her before she died if she would be willing to be buried in Stockbridge in the Sedgwick family pie. Now, I think the next slide. Yes. And she agreed. She's buried next to Catherine Maria Sedgwick. She's buried directly across from Theodore Sedgwick in what is called the Sedgwick family pie. It's in the Stockbridge Cemetery, and it's a pie shape. So Theodore, you can go to the next slide. Let's see. That's her next. That's Catherine with the cross next to Mumbet's. And then go to the next slide and you'll see the obelisk. Those two, that's the tall one is Theodore, the shorter one is Pamela. And they're in the middle. So anyone who's in a Sedgwick, now probably Kira Sedgwick and Kevin Bacon will be buried there someday. And it goes in a concentric circle. Everything is surrounding Theodore and Pamela. And Mumbet is directly across from Theodore and right next to her beloved Catherine. And on her grave, I'm going to read her epitaph. And it says, Elizabeth Freeman, known by the name of Mumbet, died December 28, 1829. Her supposed age was 85 years. She was born a slave and remained a slave for nearly 30 years. She could neither read nor write, yet in her own sphere she had no superior nor equal. She neither wasted time nor property. She never violated a truth nor failed to perform a duty. In every situation of domestic trial, she was the most efficient helper and the tenderest friend. Good mother, farewell. And her grave is visited by many, many people now. If you can go back 2 slides, you can see there's little stones on top of, yeah, there you go. People come and they lay flowers and they come and they celebrate her. And I think Tammy mentioned that there's a movie in the making. So let's go further and I'll tell you a little bit more about what we do. So there's Tammy Denise. You can see that. It's the legacy. So that's the barn, which is dedicated to Mumbet. It's all about her legacy. And we are trying to preserve her legacy, not only through this book, but the trustees of the reservations definitely preserving this legacy because it is so important. Her story is so important. Her quest for freedom, her bravery, her courage, her perseverance, she's an amazing woman. She's my hero. And go to the next slide, please. So we do this every year. We do there's Tammy Denise again. We do Mumbet Day. That's an old poster. And on Mumbet Day, we have a celebration of Mumbet. They open the Ashley House. They take tours. We do something called a Mumbet Walk to Freedom. And every year around August 21st, we've been doing this now for, I think we're going into our 15th year. I had this idea. I said, let's do this commemorative reenactment walk to freedom. She walked 4 miles on this hot day. Probably she did it in June. We're doing it in August. It's really hot when we do it. And we walk all the way to the Sedgwick House. And then go to the next slide. So there we go. There's Tammy Denise. She is doing her performance. She's standing next to our state representative, Smitty Pignatelli. And she did a performance, or she's often done that, on the porch of the Sedgwick House. And then Smitty Pignatelli reads the resolution. And I'm going to read you. I have this from the House of Representatives. I don't know if you can see me, but I'm going to read it. Resolution. I'm just going to read a few of these. Whereas Elizabeth Freeman, who later came to be known as Mumbet, successfully sued John Ashley for her freedom, and whereas the jury in the case of Brom and Bet versus Ashley ruled in favor of the plaintiffs on the 21st day of August in the year 1781 in the Court of Common Pleas in the town of Great Barrington. And whereas the aforementioned case was based on the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, which was ratified in the year 1780, and whereas the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, as a result, in part of the aforementioned case, became the first state in the nation to abolish slavery in the year 1783. And whereas the outcome of the case of Brom and Bet versus Ashley proved significant to the outcome of a future court case in which Chief Justice William Cushing told a jury that all men were born free and equal, that every subject is entitled to liberty and should have it guarded by the laws, and that perpetual servitude can no longer be tolerated by the government. What a legacy. I'm just so proud of being part of her story. Go to the next slide, please. So there's the Elizabeth Freeman Walk to Freedom. That's me and Anne Elizabeth. Go to the next slide. We have people who actually reenact being Mumbet and Little Bet. That's actually one of my students, a little girl. She's from Ethiopia. Keep going. Here she is saying, I'm free, I'm free. Go to the next slide, please. Oh, here's Tammy again. You go to the next slide because I think this is when, here we all are in front of this, right in front of the Sedgwick House. So there's usually a lot of people who come with us and walk that day. And sometimes we do it as we raise money for either the Elizabeth Freeman Center, we do it like a pledge walk, or the Southern Poverty Law Center. We've done that too. Keep going. And here, and actually that is when it says that she was free and Colonel Ashley had to pay those court costs. And that's Sminny Pignatelli again reading that. Go to the next slide. And there's Tammy doing her reenactment. And the next slide, I believe, is where Tammy and Sminny Pignatelli and I went to the State House in Boston. They did not know the story, and Tammy told the story. She acted out this, she did the story, her performance, and they were astonished. It was amazing. Keep going. This is just how we depict her in our book. We believe she was a beautiful, beautiful woman with an incredible heart. And go to the next page. Children all over Massachusetts and beyond are reading this book. Our book won the New York City Reads 365. So it was a selection for 5th grade in the curriculum. We wrote our book for 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders to meet the curriculum frameworks in Massachusetts, Connecticut, New York. And I have been invited, and Anne Elizabeth, and we've been invited to schools all over the place. In fact, I am going to Conti School Thursday. I'm going to be working for 4 weeks with the children on this book and doing historical, talking about preservation, the legacy of this incredible woman, and slavery in Massachusetts, and freedom and the American Revolution. The next slide, please. We have created, there's such a stir now, and it's such an important story that there is now a beautiful bronze statue in the center of Sheffield overlooking the Sedgwick House, and it is a statue of Mumbet. Sminny Pignatelli was there. Governor Deval Patrick was there. There's a letter from Barack Obama saying how important this is, a letter from Meryl Streep saying how important this story is, and we need to get the story out to a wider audience. And it's just an incredible story. So I'm so happy to be part of it, and a thrill to have met Tammy Denise. And Tammy is going to come back on, I believe, and tell how she met me and how we worked together. So thank you so much.
Jana, why was I such a big part of your presentation?
Because you're awesome, and you
all of that. But one of the things, I do need a copy of that picture. I'm really honored in that picture at the State House because I was with the first Black judge, Judge Ireland, and the poet laureate, Bobby, I cannot remember his name, and one of the senators. But I would love to have that picture because I don't have that one.
Well, I will send it.
It was really great. This is the actual book that I received when I first found out about Elizabeth Freeman. I think I was headed to Conti School or one of the schools in Mass. I can't remember, but the day before I did a performance of Sarah Margaux from the Amistad in Litchfield and the Litchfield Historical Society. And just as I was leaving the next day to come to Mass to do Sarah Margaux again, I read her email and she says, "Hey, Tammy, I thought you'd find this woman, Elizabeth Mumbet Freeman, fascinating. Have you ever heard of her?" I was like, "No." And I just got
You're right. It was Conti School.
It was Conti School.
Yep.
Okay.
Where I'm going to be on Thursday. Yes.
Okay. And then when I arrive at the school, the principal, Donna Leap, hands me this very book. Her name is in here, and you actually autographed it. She says to me, "Have you ever heard of Elizabeth Mumbet Freeman?" I said, "Yeah, 2 hours ago." And I was like, I need to know who this woman is because I've never heard of her before. And then in 2 hours, I hear her name, and she gave me her book. And so this is the actual book that came from Donna Leap.
That's so great.
And you actually signed it. And then let's say I got married that year. We were on our honeymoon and we came back and we went through the Berkshires, and we went to where the family pie is, and it was the Trustees of Reservation. And they asked me to come perform her that August. And that is where you and I first met. And we've been fast friends ever since. But
that was a long time ago. That was like 2011 or
2010. 2010.
Wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
2010. And we bonded over her story, and we learned so much more as time went on, and being able to tell her story and to be a part. And we've done some great things in bringing her legacy to life. Although she's a national figure, she does have a Connecticut connection. She was related to the granddaughter. No, hold on. His name was Samuel Webb. His second wife was Elizabeth Hoggaboom. And I still don't know her connection to Peter. She was either his daughter or his granddaughter. That's the piece I could never figure out. But they lived here in Wethersfield, Connecticut. So that is Mumbet's Connecticut connection, because she took care of the Hoggaboom family. And so that is her Connecticut connection. I appreciate the preserving of her story and her legacy, because again, she was hidden within the Berkshires, and a lot of people did not know about this woman's existence.
So many people, and some people still don't know. And then we want so much to get the story out. And I just want to show you. Here's my doll.
Yes, I have two of those. She's sitting right up there on the shelf in her rocking chair.
And these, women at the Sheffield Historical Society make these dolls, because they want to preserve her as well. They love her. She's beloved. She truly is. She's really the grandmother of civil rights. I mean, she's really the grand dame. She truly is.
Yeah. And what I love also is W.E.B. Du Bois says she was his grandmother. And that was a controversy. And what I help people to appreciate when I do my performances and that question comes up and they have some doubt about it, I'll say to them, well, here's the culture thing that you need to understand about Black Americans. Whether she was his blood grandmother or not, we have many uncles, aunts, and grandparents in our community. And she was with his grandfather. So that was his grandmother. So for you to argue and say that she was not, that's really not your place to say. And it helps people to get a different perspective and understand that, okay, this is not from the white perspective. This is from the Black perspective. And that's another reason Black narratives are so important to be told from that perspective, the Black perspective.
Yeah, in many cultures, they just call all the friends and relatives auntie and uncle and grandma. You know, it's like that in many cultures, and your culture especially.
Yeah. So I'm looking forward to, I took Mumbet to Charleston, South Carolina last year to the Belgrove Plantation. And no one in the South had heard of her in that town. And they were very happy and very pleased to learn about her story and to know that she was such a heroine. And they appreciated how the story was being told, that she was not some domesticated helper with no ambition and who needed to be prodded to do everything. They appreciated the fact that, because in the South, even though slavery is touted to be from the South, the North benefited just as much from slavery as the South did. But in the South, there's a lot more pride in their heritage, not from being an enslaved person, but from their determination and their resiliency to do what they had to do within the circumstances in which they were in. And so they were very proud, happy and proud to hear her story, and they wanted more. So I was glad to do that. I've actually been able to perform for the school system in Iowa for her. And in March, I will be in Marblehead doing the story of Elizabeth Freeman. One of the things that we touched on was the controversy about her name. Some people would like to say that Bet was her enslaved name and that Mumbet too. But again, you need to know your history. You need to understand context, and you need to understand words and what they really mean. Mumbet is not her enslaved name. Mumbet was the name the Sedgwick children gave her out of affection and love. And I also like to help people to appreciate Mumbet had her own mind. And if she did not wish to be called Mumbet, it would have stopped. She would not stop.
She definitely had her own mind.
And that was the thing I really appreciated about her, is that her thing was, I may be enslaved. I may, someone else may determine where my wins and goals, But her attitude was, I'm still a human being and you will respect me. And
Absolutely.
I love that about her, because she wasn't the only one, but she's, because so much has been hidden. But I just love the fact that she was known throughout the community like that. Nah, that's bad. Nah, we're going to leave her alone. And they respected her. And so
Oh, they totally did.
yeah, I try really hard to make sure when I'm bringing her story to life that people understand she was a very well-respected woman, and she had self-respect, which carried on to the outside. So
Absolutely.
I know we have some questions. Michael will be putting them out in a moment so that we can answer the questions and comments. One of the things is, why did you make the decision to depict the young lady's pregnancy? Why did you make the decision to depict the young lady's pregnancy?
Oh, we didn't do that.
I think that's what he's saying. Why did you make the decision to depict?
It's a children's book. I mean, we just thought we actually wrote it that she had a complaint. She needed to see the judge. The true story was that she was raped by her father. We just thought, this is for third grade. We didn't want to do that. We didn't. And we think we make the right decision.
I think so too. In telling these stories, we have to be very well aware of the grade level and the age level, because we don't want to horrify little kids, but we want to be able to tell the story without watering it down. So she had a complaint, and when I'm reenacting her, when I'm performing her, depending on my audience, because I have the kids version and I have the adults version, I will say the same thing. She had a complaint. Mumbet, she had some problems. She was in trouble. I sometimes say she was in trouble, and Mumbet helped her. But if I have an adult audience, they get the full blown story. And
and in the movie script, it's a pretty intense scene. Yeah. That we
so so it just goes according to the audience. Now, what a touching story from Andre Kitt. What a touching story. My heart is full. I know this story is one for the ages.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So, someone wants to know if you can come to Stamford, Connecticut. Patricia Boyd, can you come to Stamford?
Absolutely.
Patricia,
I go anywhere, everywhere.
Patricia, if you go to janalaiz.com, JANALAIZ.com, you can connect with Jana there, and she will be able to respond to you. And if that doesn't work, you know how to get in touch with me, and I will, or if you don't, reach out to the Connecticut Freedom Trail, and I'll make sure you get her contact information.
Tammy's got me on speed dial. We got it.
Yes, yes, I'll make sure you get connected.
Yeah, I would absolutely love to come to Stamford. Absolutely.
Sure. Here is another one. Were there any ancestors involved in the book? Oh, great question.
No, we did not. We searched and searched. You mean descendants?
Descendants, yes.
Yeah. And we could not find any after like 19. It was, like somewhere in the late 1800s. We recently, and Tammy will let you know, they recently discovered a descendant who's in Virginia right now.
She's a ninth descendant, granddaughter, and she's actually from New Haven, Connecticut. And she did not know about her great grandmother. And I've had a conversation with her. She was very much overwhelmed by learning this information because she knew nothing about it. So she asked that we just give her time to process all of this and get it together, and she'll reach back out. But I did let her know the work that had been done on my end and what I do and how Jana and I are connected. So we're just waiting to get for her to finish because it may take her a while, and it's going to take a while because that's mind blowing. I remember when I saw the picture of my third great grandmother, when I saw that picture and I saw her face, it took me a while to process because I felt like, wow, I just met my great great grandma. And so it took a while to process that. So we'll give her time. Patricia wants to know, is your book in the bookstores? But no, they can order the books from you, right? Because you have your
books. If you go to the bookstore, they don't have it, you can, or they can absolutely order it. It's by all big distributors, or you can order it directly from me if you want to. I shouldn't say the A word, but you can order from anywhere. Yeah.
Fran Dwyer says, thank you so much for this presentation. Your research is so important. Thank you, Fran.
Thank you. I'm so honored. I'm just so honored. I love to tell her story. She is my hero. I love her so much. I just, she exemplifies everything I look up to, you know, freedom, tenacity, perseverance, you know, like standing up for herself. She knew her worth, and she's just incredible. And her
Yeah,
story needs to be told all over. Everyone needs to know about her. We need
everyone
to preserve her
does.
legacy. In fact, I want to read you just what E.B. Lewis, who's Coretta Scott King Award winner, he says, "I believe in the cause. We have to get these stories out to children. We can't let the legacy die. Wonderfully told." So,
Yep, exactly. And wonderfully told it is. Well, I thank you so very much, my friend, for joining us today, being a part of our author talk. We this year is going to be focusing a lot on authors and the preserving of heritage and history of Black narratives, and the understanding of why it is so important to tell Black narratives from the Black narrative perspective. But also, I appreciate the fact that you two women, you and Anne Elizabeth, you are white women, but you were determined to tell the story and make sure her story was known, and you made sure it was done from a respectful point of view. So I thank you so much of that. It says, picturing Mumbet, Nancy Faye Hecker, picturing Mumbet holding off the men from Shays Rebellion always impresses me so much. Going past these houses and imagining her is so special. Thank you, Jana and Tammy. Well, Nancy, thank you.
Thank
So
you.
much. If you look at the dedication they did of her at the barn, there's a picture of me standing looking out of the window. I'm actually in the room that Mom Bet stayed in. And so I'll never forget taking that picture and looking out that window. I felt like I was literally standing in her place, in her shoes. It was such a, I don't want to say magical, but I guess it was. But
Yeah.
it was a transforming moment to stand there and to know that this is the room she occupied, and that so much history was in that room because she was there. So it's beautiful. It's a heavy responsibility to want to tell these stories and to tell them correctly, because especially in today's climate of wanting to not tell Black history and to be forbidden to tell Black history. So again, I thank you so very much for that. And this book is more timely today than ever to tell her story and to make sure it's out there. So between us and others who believe in telling these Black narratives correctly and accurately, I think her legacy has been preserved, and I think it will continue to go on. So Jana, I thank you so very much, because you just got off the plane from Costa Rica. So I thank you so very much for taking the time to be here, and all the work that you do. It is greatly appreciated. So thank you so very much.
My pleasure. Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for our first conversation at noon on the Connecticut Freedom Trail in 2025. But please be prepared for more, because we have other author talks coming up next month, Tuesday, February 25th. And it's always the fourth Tuesday of each month. The Village Coach. It's a book talk with children's author Bruce Trammell. Then Tuesday, March 25th, Brooding Bloody Vengeance, a conversation with author and professor Nikki Taylor. And then April 22nd, we have the story of Mary McLeod Bethune, the Pan-Africanist, a conversation with author Ashley Preston. So we have some great conversations coming up in the future. Thank y'all so much for supporting us. We really appreciate it. Again, take the survey. Let us know how we're doing. Let us know what you would like to see and have us talk about. Thank you so very much again for the support and being with us. Until the next time.